Member for Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Acting Speaker. I'd like to rise to make a contribution on this very important motion that's been proposed by the Leader of the National Party to create a select committee to investigate into the circumstances surrounding the rise of intrusion, if you like, into the farming operations in the state from people such as the animal activists that we've seen operating throughout the country, but also others who are doing more, shall we say, traditional crimes such as stock theft and machinery theft, etc. And there's a modern twist to all of this with the rise of social media, the use of drones, and all of those new circumstances which government is not able to readily cope with. We saw the situation in Melbourne over the earlier part of this week on Monday, where the entire CBD of the centre of Melbourne was shut down traffic-wise because of protests. And we know that this isn't just affecting farmers themselves, but everybody else that's involved in the supply chain, such as stock agents, such as livestock selling centres, such as abattoirs, etc. So all of those areas are coming into the attention of these particular groups who are out to protest not animal cruelty, but the use of animals. They may see it as being animal cruelty, but actually they're opposed to the use of animals in any way. To put a bit of context on what that means for Western Australia, some figures from the Department of Agriculture in 2016-17. Total output from our agricultural industries was just under $9 billion, 8,991 million. And of that, meat and livestock products was 1.8 billion, or a little bit over. Dairy farming, 192 million. And wool, 826 million. And probably people haven't thought of the wool industry in this, but wool is another product which is in the sights of these particular activists. So it's not just meat, it's not just dairy products, but also the use of animals for harvesting their product, their hair, their wool, is also opposed by these groups. And today I spoke about the poor old Gibby goat, where you know, the owners of that cafe and the staff come under terrible attack because they had that as their symbol of their cafe, and how dare they have such an animal being used to make profit of. And so it was fine by those activists to ring up and make the most frightful threats to the staff, and it's upset the owners that much that they finally gave up because they couldn't put their staff through the daily trauma of being subjected to that invective, that targeted hatred which was being levelled at them. And so we need to find innovative solutions in government to deal with this. And what we're seeing through the questioning that we've had for the in this House and in the other over the last few months, since this has become a big issue, has been shifting of the sands in responses and no certainty as to how government is going to react to it. And that's not a surprise, because if we think back to what happened with the livestock export, and it's been highlighted before that we have a Minister for Agriculture who showed very little support for the livestock industry when that export issue was being at the fore last year. And even as lately as the 7th of March 2019, I have here an article from the Albany Advertiser where she's quoted as saying, Ms McTiernan said, "It's not in the interests of farmers to ramp up the cultural war," as if the farmers are ramping up the cultural war. "To create a vegan versus farmers war suits the interests of some people, but certainly doesn't suit the purpose of farmers." Well, that's true, but you can't blame the farmers for that. It's actually the other people who are coming and attacking the industry, and she needs to be out there defending the farmers, not defending the activists.
Wasn't she the one attacking the industry by standing on the Fremantle Bridge with that?
Exactly. She was, and that's a very famous photograph in rural Western Australia of their Minister for Agriculture in a previous life, standing up there, attacking the legitimate industry in Western Australia. And this is where we are now. We have a situation where the government who does not believe in the value of agriculture.
Thank you. It's much better. Carry on, member.
We have a government who doesn't believe in the value of agriculture, and we have a Minister for Agriculture who doesn't believe in the value of agriculture.
Member for North West Central. Minister.
The article concludes with a final line from the Minister saying she did not believe that trespass laws needed to be strengthened. Well, she must be the only person in Western Australia who doesn't believe that, because there are plenty of concerns out there in rural Western Australia about the current state of the legal framework in which we operate and the ability for activists to come onto to properties, as we saw in the eastern states in their targeted campaign last Monday, where they actually entered an abattoir, I believe, in Queensland and liberated, if you like, sheep, took them home with them. I mean, what are they going to do with them now? Where are they going to live? In someone's apartment? What's going to happen to those sheep? But don't worry about that. What about the biosecurity risk of moving animals? You cannot take animals from one property to another without permits and without traceability of those animals. Now we have people running around purporting to be interested in animal welfare, actively doing things to undo protocols which are there for the protection of those animals and the prevention of disease and the traceability of any outbreaks of disease. It's simply unacceptable. And you can't go into a place like an abattoir, which is an intensive livestock centre, and not expect that there is going to be a risk to biosecurity from that intrusion. They added to that by going down the road to some dairy farms and actually harassing the animals in the paddock. Now, if you love animals, why would you go chasing them around and causing the distress? But certainly that seemed to have been their aim, to cause distress to the farmers and to cause distress to the stock, all in the name of protecting them. So I guess they believe that the ends justify the means, and we've heard that sort of view before. So in our view, as Nationals, we believe that there needs to be a targeted approach from government, a considered approach from government, and we need to get to the bottom of some of these matters, perhaps by looking more at the organisations which are setting up some of these criminal activity, because that's what it is. It's criminal activity that they wish to carry out, and activity enabled by social media. So how can we disrupt their disruptive activities? How can the community fight back to protect itself against what is basically a form of internal industrial terrorism? So we have groups like Vegan Rising, Aussie Farmers, who I believe are some sort of an offshoot of a group called Dominion Movement, who are inciting this type of activity. And thankfully we have in David Littleproud, the national member who's the Minister for Agriculture in Canberra, someone who is committed to stamping this type of behaviour out and acting very quickly to bring about a registration or a definition of Aussie farms as a group to fall under the Privacy Act. Apparently there's a threshold of turnover beyond which, under which groups normally are not brought under that Act. He's made an exception in their case. Any group less than $3 million in turnover is not normally subject to the Act, but he has changed that situation so that they fall under the Privacy Act and ramped up the maximum fine from $420,000 to $2.1 million. So if the Privacy Commissioner can show that the activities of Aussie Farms has caused harm to innocent parties, then they could be subject to that type of sanction. And as we've heard, there's now promises of new offences being created in the new Parliament to further protect farmers and those involved in their legitimate livestock activities from these unwanted intrusions on their properties. So, as I said, we had a Minister for Agriculture who as recently as the 7th of March, last month, is quoted as saying she did not believe that trespass laws needed to be strengthened. I believe that the trespass laws do need to be strengthened, but that certainly needs to be examined properly, and I'd be much happier, much more confident that we would have a good outcome if we had the time and we had a diligent inquiry into what are the best approaches to actually curb this activity and to ensure that farmers can go about their business, which is worth in the vicinity of $2.8 billion per year to Western Australia. It's not chicken feed, pardon the pun, but it's certainly a very, very important industry to the state. And it's an important industry in my electorate. So in the Moore electorate, now there are many examples of intensive livestock enterprises and many feedlots, many farmers who grow sheep for wool and meat, and also cattle farmers, etc. And of course we had the Mushea Livestock Centre, which was invaded earlier on by a group of activists, and there we saw some examples of what you might call belligerency by those people in stopping people from going about their activities in the centre. And I think that was on the 21st of January, where about 30 activists spent quite a while on one of the sale days taking photos of people going about their business, actually using those as intimidatory devices to try to prevent people from going about their lawful business of trading in livestock. I mean, that centre there is an essential part of the livestock supply chain in Western Australia. And if we can't protect that basically on the outskirts of Perth, then what hope have we got of protecting isolated farms, as the member for Warren Blackwood has spoken about, where they may be an hour, 2 hours, they might be 3 hours, they might be 5 hours from substantial police resources. And where are they going to, and what priority are the police going to put upon these types of activities? That will come from direction from this place, direction through a committee, reporting back, those considerations then being looked at by government and some real strategies being put in place, instead of what we've seen, which is every time we ask a question here, we get a slightly different answer. So there are nuances as we go along. I'm not saying that people aren't considering the situation. I'm not saying that they aren't trying to address it. But unless you actually take a deep and very insightful look at the situation as it exists and try to come up with a strategy which actually addresses what is a new situation. It's not a situation we've faced before. It's a new situation. It requires some innovation and some new responses. And I don't think we're going to get that if we just think, oh, well, we'll what was the one we had where we were going to increase the ambit of the restraining orders so that people who had been convicted already of an offence could be prevented from re-offending. Well, I would suggest if they were prepared to be convicted of an offence of trespass in the first place, they're probably quite prepared to break a restraining order. That's not necessarily going to do the job. These are people who are not, I think, going to be easily put off by threats of punishments and would see that in some way as being a little bit of a, perhaps even a badge of honour to be dragged off by the police and in the pursuit of their game, of their aims, as they believe, in saving the animals. They're not saving the animals, and we've seen, I think what they're probably going to do in some of the circumstances is expose the animals to a great deal of risk, especially when they're breaking the biosecurity protocols which would normally protect the livestock which are in those facilities. And again, just getting back to this situation where we have the sparsely populated areas of the state, where we have people who must be living in fear now because their farms, their centres, their facilities have been put on a map and shown to the world that this is where you go if you want to make a point. Take along your cameras or take along your phones and take some footage and invade someone else's property. Just take over their property. These places where families live, where it might be that there might only be some children home. There might not even be adults there at that stage. And, to have a large group of people walk in to that property and virtually take it over. You imagine how intimidating that would be for a young family in a very, very remote part of the state. So we have consistently been arguing the case, I think, for improved police resources generally in regional Western Australia. And in particular, I know that the Honourable Colin de Grasso has been seeking to get some improvements for some time now in things like the old stock squad, getting that back up and running. And we haven't really seen much support coming from the government for that. So I hope that we'll see some support from the government for this motion, which is of itself simply a request for a select committee of people who are already here. We're not asking for extra people to be involved. The people are here in Parliament to be established to inquire into all of the circumstances which are leading to this highly threatening situation for what is one of the most vital industries that we have in regional WA. And if you can imagine what it would be like in regional WA if we did not have a wool industry, if we did not have a dairy industry, if we did not have a beef industry. I just think the risks to our state and to our economy are extreme and they're dire. And to quibble about setting up an inquiry and a committee to look in the best way to protect one of the most vital industries we have, an industry which will continue to provide food, not just for Western Australia, but for many parts of the world for years to come. Long after there's no iron ore left in the ground, there'll still be room for sheep and room for cattle to graze in Western Australia and to produce vital products, not just for Western Australians but for the rest of the world. But that won't happen if we shut down the meat and livestock industry, if we shut down the wool industry, if we shut down the dairy industry, and these industries are under real threat. And I would implore members of the government on that side with their numbers to look very closely at this motion and to support us in establishing this committee so that we can get on with the job that the people in Western Australia expect of us, and that job is considered development of laws and strategies that will protect legitimate industries in Western Australia into the future. Thank you.